a luxury train entered a mountain tunnel and never came out. On June 14, 1911, more than 100 Italian elites boarded one of Europe's most extravagant trains, set to travel from Rome to Milan in just 7.5 hours. But midway through the journey, as the passengers dined, laughed, and relaxed, the train slipped into a tunnel carved into a mountain and vanished. No wreckage, no survivors, no trace. Over a century later, the question still haunts historians. How does an entire train disappear into thin air? In the late 19th century, an Italian company called Zanetti designed a luxurious 3-car train, specifically for a railway line they had also built. Its journey was to begin from the Italian capital, Rome, reaching the Lombardy region in Milan, a distance of 550 kilometers. In May 1911, a month before the anticipated journey, the company announced that the trip would be all-inclusive, with food and drink, as well as musicians to entertain the passengers. They would also pass through stunning natural landscapes characteristic of areas like Lazio and Abruzzo. Even more astonishing, the first trip would be completely free, but it would only be available to members of the upper class. The company's plan was for all passengers on the inaugural journey to be exclusively wealthy, which would give the train prestige and increase interest from the rich worldwide, ultimately benefiting the company. On June 14th, the train was ready to depart, carrying 100 upper-class passengers and 6 railway employees. The train left the station before crowds of people, and the journey began smoothly. It moved slowly, allowing passengers to enjoy the scenic nature surrounding them. Everyone was extremely happy, and things were going well until the train reached a point between the Emilia and Romagna regions, gradually increasing its speed. The train was entering a 1-kilometer-long tunnel carved inside a mountain. It was supposed to pass through and exit the other side within a minute at most. But what happened then was that the train indeed entered the tunnel, but no one knows where it went after that. The Lombardy Tunnel, which the train entered, was part of the itinerary, and passengers were eagerly anticipating it, just like the other stations they had passed along the way. This was because the Lombardy Tunnel was considered the longest mountain tunnel ever dug. To maximize publicity, the company had brought a group of people to stand at the tunnel's entrance to wave goodbye to the passengers before they entered, and another group was waiting at the exit to greet them. Indeed, the group at the entrance waved to the passengers and watched them enter the tunnel. But minute after minute passed, and the group at the exit saw no sign of the train, nor did they hear a sound indicating it was about to emerge. As time went on, signs of tension began to appear on people's faces. They felt something strange was happening. The first thought that crossed their minds was that something had happened to the train inside the tunnel, causing it to break down. So they called the police to rescue the passengers trapped in the middle of the mountain. Because the news of the journey had spread throughout the country, the police wasted no time and arrived quickly with several maintenance officials from the Zanetti Company, in case the train was stalled and they needed to find a solution. As soon as they arrived, they entered the tunnel and walked almost past the halfway point. At the same time, they found nothing. No broken down train, no trace of an accident, no explosion, no fire, nothing. But soon after, they found 2 of the passengers who had been on board the train, sitting motionless on the tracks, their bodies covered in injuries, and their faces etched with shock and terror. After the unexplained disappearance of the train, the news spread like wildfire in the media. The police transferred the 2 men they found to a psychiatric hospital to recover from the shock, and at the same time, to try and get any information about what had happened. Days after the incident, with no lead on the train's whereabouts, one of the 2 men recovered from the shock and began to speak. The truth is, his words, instead of solving the mystery, complicated it further. When asked to recount what happened, he told them that until the moment the train entered the tunnel, the atmosphere was stable and things were fine. But suddenly, without any warning, a black cloud appeared, covering all the train windows, and they started to hear a strange humming sound, whose source no one knew. In an instant, before they could even comprehend what was happening, a thick white smoke filled the train completely, and a state of chaos erupted, with everyone running to try and save themselves. The man telling the story and the second person found with him, as soon as they saw the black cloud, ran to the nearest door. and as soon as they heard the passengers screaming, both of them immediately jumped from the train and rolled a great distance on the ground, which caused the injuries and bruises covering their bodies. But after they got up, they looked to see what had happened to the train and if anyone else had jumped, only to find that everything that had been there had vanished like dissolved salt. No train, no passengers, as if they had been in a dream and had just woken up. The man's account caused a state of panic among everyone who heard it, whether doctors or investigators. Some believed it and tried to find a logical explanation for what happened, while others said it was just hallucinations resulting from the strong trauma they experienced. But regardless of whether these words were true or hallucinations, they still didn't know exactly where the train went, especially since the tunnel doesn't have any other passages or exits for the train to emerge from. And the people standing at the only exit said that no one came out. In addition, this wasn't the first train journey to pass through the Lombardy tunnel. Other trains had passed before it, and nothing had happened to them. So, what exactly happened to this particular train? And what's the story of the 2 passengers who were found out of the 106? Many unanswered questions, but nevertheless, officials decided to close the tunnel permanently for fear of such an incident recurring. And the Zanetti Company did everything in its power to prevent the press from talking about the subject, because such news would ruin the company's reputation in the market. And it did manage to cover up the news, as they say, and 2 years passed on this mysterious riddle without answers. Then World War I came in 1914, and the Lombardy Tunnel was completely destroyed due to aerial bombardment. Despite the strange blackout of the news and the silence of the victims' families, about whom a journalist wrote that they were silenced by force. Even though they were all from prominent families in the country, as we mentioned, one investigator was interested in the subject and determined to solve the mystery. He began searching ancient historical documents for any incident resembling this one, hoping to find a lead to follow. He discovered a document containing a testimony from a psychiatrist from Mexico City named Jose Saxon. The document dates back to the 1840s, about 70 years before the disappearance incident. Jose had written in the document about a very strange incident that occurred. A group of people suddenly appeared on the streets of Mexico wearing different clothes, looking strange, acting in a confused manner, and speaking a language different from the local language, so they didn't understand anyone, and no one understood them. Immediately, the locals informed the police, who came and took them. There, specialized translators were brought, and it was discovered that they were speaking Italian. When they tried to understand how they got there and what they wanted, they said they didn't know how they had arrived. All they remembered was riding a train from the Italian capital and suddenly finding themselves there. And there's no means of transportation connecting Italy and Europe with Mexico on an entirely different continent. But their persistence and steadfastness in their stance led doctors to diagnose them as mentally ill and transfer them to a mental hospital. This isn't the only striking point in Jose's document. Jose also said that the number of patients he received was 104, and when he interrogated them, they all agreed that they came from a completely different time than the time they were in now. This was clear from their appearance and clothes, which were different even from the attire of Italians at that period. What further perplexed the doctors was that one of these patients was carrying a cigarette pack with a production date of 1907 AD written on it, 67 years after the date they were in. Yet people disregarded this talk and insisted that they were patients, except for Dr. Jose, who felt something was wrong but couldn't understand it, and decided to tell their story in his document. He said that some of them eventually adapted to the new situation and continued their lives, while others went insane. This account prompted the investigator who found the document to link this incident with the Zanetti train incident. He suspected that the patients Jose talked about were the same passengers who disappeared with the train, especially since they were Italian, had been riding a train, and numbered 104, which is the same number as the 106 passengers when you subtract the 2 who jumped. But also, if these were the passengers, how could they have traveled this distance? Europe is on one continent, and Mexico on a completely different one. And if we assume someone kidnapped them, for example, how is there no trace of the train anywhere in Italy? Meaning the kidnapper wouldn't have carried them and the train across the ocean. And if we overlook all this, how could the kidnapper take them back in time? About 10 years passed since the train's disappearance, and the matter was closed, with people stopping talking about it. Until one day, one of the missing passengers' relatives was at a monastery called San Pietro in the city of Modena, Italy. He accidentally discovered a strange document dating back to the Middle Ages, roughly the 15th century AD. This document was a testimony from a priest who lived at that time, recounting a story stranger than fiction. A giant metal carriage, which he described as the Devil's Carriage, suddenly appeared in the middle of the city, emitting a strange and loud sound that filled the hearts of all who heard it with terror. The carriage was divided into 4 parts. The first part, at the front, had a metal pole on top from which thick black smoke emerged, and the 3 carriages at the back were smaller and filled with windows covered by curtains. As soon as this strange object stopped, 3 people emerged from it, whom the monk referred to in the document as worshippers of the devil, describing them as wearing strange black clothes he had never seen before. At that time, all the people present fled and locked themselves in their homes, and even the monks themselves entered the monastery and locked themselves in. He said that these 3 went to the monastery door and kept knocking for someone to open for them, but the monks inside were afraid to open and remained in that state until the people in the train disappeared completely. The person who found this document was very surprised by the similarity between the specifications of this train and the disappeared Zanetti train. Both consisted of 4 cars, their windows were covered with curtains, and the front car had a large metal column from which smoke emerged. But the Middle Ages didn't have trains at all, so how could a train appear out of nowhere during that period and suddenly disappear? Even stranger, the document found by this person was preserved in the records of a family called Sagino, which was the same name as one of the 2 who jumped from the Zanetti train before it disappeared. So, is it possible that the Sagino family had a role in what happened? And could the train mentioned in the 2 documents actually be the Zanetti train? And how could it appear in 2 different times? After 44 years passed since the train's disappearance, on October 29, 1955, a signalman named Pyotr Ustimenko was on duty at a railway crossing near a small village called Zavala, belonging to a Ukrainian city. But as he sat after midnight, at a time when no train was supposed to arrive at the station, Pyotr noticed a bright light coming from a distance in the darkness. When he got up and tried to focus to find the source of this light, he found that the light was gradually approaching him, and it turned out that this light was coming from the headlights of a strange train moving at high speed and without any sound. Even stranger, the train was moving in an area where there were no tracks for it to run on. And even stranger, the train he saw had a shape and design completely different from any train he had seen before. At first, he thought it was hallucinations from staying up late or work stress, but he reported it to the police anyway. When the police asked him about the specifications of the train he saw, he told them it looked like an old train, with a huge chimney protruding from the front car, emitting thick black smoke, and all its windows were covered with luxurious curtains, but there were no passengers on it. Of course, this account did not make sense to the people interrogating him, and they told him that it was definitely just delusions. But the press had a different opinion. Pyotr's story spread and became on everyone's lips, and people began to link the specifications of the train he saw with the Zanetti train that had disappeared many years ago, and the discussion about the story was reopened, especially since Pyotr had no background on the Zanetti train story itself, nor did he know its specifications. What would make a simple signalman from a remote village in a Soviet Union country know information about an Italian train that disappeared many years ago and no one had mentioned for over 35 years? After the news of the ghost train appearing in Ukraine spread, people began reporting sightings of a train with the same specifications in various parts of the world. Even Italy itself, where the train disappeared, it reappeared as a passengerless ghost, hovering in the air without tracks. And some countries recorded sightings of the train more than once over the years. Russia, for example, people reported seeing the train once in 1975, once in 1981, and once in 1986. In 1992, the Ukrainian newspaper Gloria, in its August 12th issue, published an article titled "Ghost Train on the Roads of Ukraine," and it told in the article about a train with an old design, open doors and closed curtains, with no passengers, appearing from time to time on the streets of Ukraine, staying for moments, and then disappearing without a trace. Since then, The story of the Zanetti train has become one of the most mysterious stories told by people around the world, and theories have begun to emerge attempting to explain the train's disappearance. One of the most famous of these theories states that in 1911, the year the train disappeared, a strong earthquake occurred in the area of the Lombardy tunnel, causing a time portal to open inside the tunnel. This portal swallowed the train and transported its passengers once to the Middle Ages and another time to Mexico in the 19th century. There, as we learned, they were confined to the hospital, some of them continuing their lives normally, and others going insane. After them, the train continued to travel from time to time and from country to country without its passengers.